Thank you for joining me today. I'm here today with Alli Quinlan, Acting Director of Inc. Dev Alliance, a national nonprofit promoting small-scale real estate development and newer developers and getting them the skills and the support they need to be successful. This YouTube series that I'm doing is called Creative Real Estate Ownership, CREO. And I'm a real estate agent and investor based in Berkeley, California, and it is very, very expensive here to buy, to build, to get through the regulations. And so when I saw your talk recently in Oakland, I was like, wow, you are addressing some of the issues and thinking about the obstacles that I faced in my life. And so I was just really excited to talk to you and have you in for a short chat.
Thanks for having me.
So if you wouldn't mind, if you could tell me a little bit about Inc. Dev Alliance background and how you kind of arrived at being a developer yourself. I'm imagining you're part of the vision and the mission in terms of what the work does. If you could just kind of got there, a little bit of evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Incremental Development Alliance is a national nonprofit. It was founded in 2015 by small developers who wanted to train people in what was really feeling like a lost art, right? Of the way that a lot of our neighborhoods used to be built by locals, working in one place really deeply in this very non-extractive way, right? Of working to build what their community was missing. And so our structure is we've got a faculty that is mostly national experts on housing who also develop themselves. And so all of our faculty members tend to be people who wear a lot of hats, which is the thing that we find about small developers is it's people who are architects and they also, do development and they also are on their planning commission. People that really see how complicated housing is and are touching it in lots of ways. And so the Alliance has trained around 8,000 people in the last 10 years since our founding. It's our 10th year in 32 states and 2 Canadian provinces. And we have a national membership base that offers member industry expert discussions and peer learning platform. We really try to make social connections and educational connections between people that are running into the same problems. We do really train people in local cohorts, and we think that the most successful places that our trainings have happened have cohorts of small developers that work collaboratively and know one another, share their tips and tricks and successes, and also serve as sort of emotional support on those really tough days that we all know happen as small developers. But then we also try to make those connections more nationally. We have people that just do, take a strip mall and cut it into smaller units. We have people that just do cottage courts. And so also being able to make those connections between people who share the same specialties, again, for that peer learning and support and really knowledge sharing. So we do that through we've got a membership Slack channel, we have national field trips. It also then gives discounts on trainings. Our training curriculum is one of the ways that I, met you, and one of the main things that we do, which is a 3-series training that is geared as much around developing knowledge, a shared language, and relationships in what we call the ecosystem of small development, as it is just training small developers. So we started out with this real focus of only training small developers and realized really quickly that setting them loose in these communities that had no idea what they were trying to do, had no shared language, had no built-in trust, was really miserable for the small developers and really frustrating for our communities. And so we really quickly shifted to what we would call an ecosystem training model as well. So that is your mayor and your planning director and your city council members and your bankers and your appraisers and your realtors and your tenants and your housing advocacy, nonprofit housing developers, everybody that is touching, impacting, building officials, fire marshals is always really, really good ones. Everybody that's touching this industry that doesn't realize that they're just 1 in 200 steps and hurdles that a small developer has to make it through. And so really trying to build a common positively focused language around what kind of positive thing we're trying to build, right? Which is a community with housing choice. That means you can find the kind of house or small business space that you need in the neighborhood that you want, walkable to the amenities that you like at a price point that you can afford. And that is a thing that, every community that we work in nationally varies in exactly what they're struggling with. But that is at core what everybody is struggling with, is that variety of housing choice, that variety of sizes and price points and unit arrangements, and that real loss of walkable amenity neighborhoods that used to define a lot of our, the classic American small town had small shops that had apartments above them and walkable houses, a couple blocks back, a wide variety of kinds of businesses, and this development pattern that we've really lost nationally. And so we work to train people and communities to rebuild that.
So you're working. So when you say you've trained 8,000 people, are you talking specifically about folks who are building housing, developers themselves?
It's total attendees to our trainings. And we would say usually about 50% of attendees to trainings are actual small developers. So it's probably 4,000 to 6,000 actual small developers. And sometimes people come as, expecting to be an ecosystem member and then actually realize that in fact, they might be a small developer themselves.
Okay, great. And so those people that are in attendance, building relationships with each other is a big piece of this. And so
that's absolutely right.
Yeah, I was floored. So my first project, it was urban infill. It was a 6-unit building on the corner in Lower Diamond District of Oakland, and it had a big lot in the back. And I decided I wanted to build another 6 units on right in that bed. There was a weird shack in the back, and I tore it down and put another 6 units up to make a 12-unit development. Almost killed me. It was so hard.
So hard.
Yeah. And so what I was really struck by was, all those players that are involved, all these people that are coming in and doing just their piece and don't really care about the other pieces. I'm the only person that kind of really cared about all the pieces and how they fit together. So when you say something like kind of developing language around these things, developing kind of a teamwork mentality, maybe in cities, on the government level and both on the private sector level. How do you is that part of your mission, is develop these kind of like a teamwork approach and promote that?
Yeah, we would call that a culture of yes, is often what we find communities that are successful, right? So we've been training, and there are communities that we went into in our first couple of years, and our curriculum has developed so much, in the last 10 years, and our approach has developed a lot in the last 10 years. And I think some of that is, we have a faculty that are actively small developers now, who can recognize and talk cogently about how different development in 2025 is from development in 2023, from 2018, from 2014, right? You have to continue to change with the market. The approaches that we have to use to get things done are very different year to year based on market fluctuations. Who's got tariffs this year, right? What interest rates are like. But there are also, kind of underpinning that, these really consistent big picture challenges that we really have to all be working together to advocate to see change in. And so we both are really trying to build this culture of advocacy, within communities. And sometimes that also means empowering planners who think that they're only allowed to interpret the code in the sad way, right? They can never use that code hack that is technical compliance with the code that is leading positively towards projects that positively forward often the city's future land use or comprehensive plans. Because often communities have these really positive, forward-looking, very inclusive general planning documents that generally are completely illegal under the city's current code. And so we put planners and public officials in this really strange position where we're telling them we want this kind of place and we want this kind of development that is not legal to build in a town. And then they have to, shoot down projects that they might personally think are great because it doesn't meet the current code standards. And so one thing that we're really trying to promote is a culture of teamwork, right? And a public employee culture of, right, there often is this, the worst thing that you can do is say yes to a project that somebody hates. And so it's better to just say no and not let anything happen than to let something happen that is new and different that might be your fault. And so often we're also trying to train public officials, and especially higher level public officials, the mayors and the city council members, the elected officials that we work with, that they really have to provide top cover to their staff and to their people on the ground, that needs to reverse. And that in fact, we want them to really be empowering their teams to follow the code to the letter of the law in a way that is forwarding the city's goals, and that they should get more. And, if you're going to get yelled at about something, it should be saying no to something great, not saying yes to something that could have been better. But there are so many times that we're really trying to promote small scale infill projects don't have that big a negative impact on the neighborhood, right? Like one 6-unit building that's not perfect, the housing is more important than the eave detail being just right. And if you zoom out and you look at most communities, every building is not perfect, right? Every front yard is not perfect. The parking is not perfect. And so this idea that we have to like let perfect be the enemy of not having people sleeping in cars is really sideways. And so often we're trying to take a step back and really have cities, city staff, elected officials, bankers and appraisers, and all of these people in the ecosystem think about how real and impactful the problems of housing are, and take a realization that like people are sleeping in cars and freezing to death under overpasses, and we're talking about the exposure of the siding profile and whether or not it perfectly meets architectural design standards. And we're talking about the PSI of the concrete and the sidewalk out front, and that we're focusing on the wrong things as a group, and that as a group we have to work together to do something different to get a different outcome.
Right. Yeah, I found that risk aversion was such a big deal, with planners and permitting, and that so many people are just like, if I say yes to this, it falls on my lap. If it doesn't work, I potentially lose my job, my benefits, and this and that. And so this risk aversion, whereas we're, as developers, we're taking a huge amount of risk, right? And it seems like there should be a way to distribute some of that risk, right? Not have it be, that we're all trying to do this together, right? As opposed to you developer, you're going to make all the money, and that's you take all the risks. But there should be a way, like spreading out that risk, sharing that risk, and being like, hey, we're all doing it collectively. And I didn't find that in the city. I just found a lot of risk aversion for sure.
I think that is true in a lot of cities, and I think some of that too is also then sharing some of the rewards of pride in place, right? That in the cities that we see that are really successful, we also then have planners that can say, I was the planner on that project, I helped them get this through, and they're really proud of that project that got done, that may not be perfect, but it's great and people like it. And that they can also, everybody recognizing how important each one of these roles is. The developer is really just the conductor between this whole group of people that all have to do their part. And so I think building more locally focused small development has really helped us too, in focusing on building that pride in place, and that we are all working together on a mutually agreed upon vision for what we want our place to be. And that, that gives people a little bit less risk aversion. And that, again, that top cover from elected officials is absolutely critical, right? That in fact, it does, I don't know how much you watch Parks and Rec, but it is like such a satisfying, we're going to rewatch, right? And it is that really satisfying. People coming to a public meeting and yelling at you is like the worst thing that happens in a planner's job. And so that then becomes the thing they're responding to. And so having a city in which, you don't let that happen for 20 minutes at a time, right? And you receive public comment, but you also are like, okay, everybody's making the same comments. Everybody that's here to repeat those, you're welcome to come up and say, I agree with everything that's been said. But if you don't have new things to add, let's just come up and agree, versus letting 40 people in a row come up to the mic and for 5 minutes each sit and like lambast this young junior planner who's like, let something happen that is forward for the city goals, but like neighbors are mad about. I think there's lots of small tweaks that we can with the spirit and letter of our law that can make a big difference in whether or not a planner feels like they're empowered to make good decisions and to yield good results for their place.
Talk to me a little bit about, I love this concept of the missing middle, right? And my building, and the missing middle is like, I'm not going to go out and build a 30-unit building, 50-unit building. I don't have the resources to do that. So I was able to do 12 units, right? With collected investor funds, it's kind of a syndicated deal, I guess. But I was able to do that. And in addition to, if you describe the missing middle a little bit, I'm also really interested when you're talking about how love plays a role here, right? Because that's a big piece of it. Like when I go to that building, I'm like, that's my baby. Like I really care about it. And the tenants can feel that from me, right? And I have a good relationship with all 12 of them as a result. And so talk to me a little bit of that missing middle and why there's an opportunity for people like me to be in this space and to do well. Very hard, but to do well
Mhm.
if we do it right. And then why that personal touch is such a big deal.
We have a sort of standard, canned joke in one of our trainings, right? That is, if this is the opposite of a get rich quick scheme, right? If you're here to like find out how you can, flip houses and make a lot of money really quickly, we'll refund your money because this
Yeah,
is not that.
right.
This is grindingly hard, soul crushing work. And some of that is because of the love and care, right? Part of the problem that we have really hit in our housing market nationally is that we treat housing like a commodity. And a commodity neighborhood, a commodity 100-unit apartment complex, there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing
Right.
wrong with the people who build those are not bad. We
Yeah.
need housing. Housing is good.
Mhm.
And it's a really different thing than, yes, the neighborhood that I developed, myself as a young mom, being on site, pregnant and with babies and strollers, and thinking about the sidewalks and thinking about, is there a place, to park a bike? The care that we are giving into small projects is the care that we're giving into our neighborhood, right? And so we often see too locals developing projects in one neighborhood cohesively over time, which we call finding your farm. They start to, all of those projects start to build on one another. And the neighbors that are impacted by something. You're building a sidewalk because there's a neighbor that takes a walk, right? On that street every day. You are putting flowers in a garden because the people that are going to see them and appreciate them. And there's a big part of this form of development that is about providing housing choice. And it is about providing more affordable housing in better locations, in smaller units that match current household sizes. Because as a country, our household size is tiny. Like our most common household type in most communities is one person living alone. The next most common is two people living together, which means our houses, if we've got mostly 3 and 4 bedroom houses, which is mostly what we have in single family home districts, we have way bigger houses than people even want, but there's nothing else available for them. So we've got people developing housing products that are built for people they know, over time being invested in as a resident. And that is just a completely different product than commodity housing, right? That is all about the bottom line. It's all about the investment performance. And these buildings do have to make money, right? If you can't get the rent, then you can't build the building.
Yeah.
If a developer goes broke, they can't build more buildings. But also there's this balance of kind of care and attention, and long-term care and attention, which is something that, property managers who are local and, are different than some corporation that you're like submitting a form online. That's a different thing.
Yeah.
And so we need both of them, but our current development system is really only based around success for those giant commodity developers who have a team of attorneys, that can get stuff through. And so a lot of what we're also doing is trying to help communities lower the bar for entry so that more locals can be developing, and that we're not sort of in this vicious cycle of projects not positively impacting communities. So neighbors hating housing projects, so neighbors complaining more and regulations getting worse, which means only more commodity developers can build them. And so we're really trying to shortcut that system and say, there is another way to do this. And it's the way that we historically did this. And it takes a really different approach.
So the missing middle, what you're talking about is these smaller buildings, right? So 2 to 12 units, 2 to 16 units, something like that.
Yeah, we would define incremental development generally as 0 to 3 stories. And we mean that 0, a lot of commercial pop-ups being intense trailers, street markets, really kind of not even a building, programming projects as amenities can be great. So 0 to 3 stories, because above 3 stories, we need elevators, which is kind of a whole different building type.
Right.
And generally, 1 to 20 units, under 20 units is most common. And those 20-unit projects sometimes they're phased, even that is a kind of higher end of this. One of the most common things that we're seeing people develop are little cottage courts, accessory dwelling units, duplexes, like a duplex in the front with an accessory dwelling unit pair in the back. Those kinds of neighborhood scaled, really small, really approachable. You may not even notice that the lot next door to you has gone multifamily, because the scale of all the buildings is the scale of a house.
Right. So, I was reading your website and you're definitely advocating somebody's buying a vacant lot and building 4 units and building like
Mhm.
a kind of a beautiful special 4 units instead of maybe just jumping into like a rehab mid-century kind of thing that's maybe doesn't fit particularly well in the neighborhood anymore. So you're
Mhm.
really like saying, hey, you might want to think about actually building this and demystifying it a little bit. Or, I mean, obviously that's a big jump from
Mhm.
an existing product to going from ground up, but it's also exciting and can be really interesting, and you can really like beautify a neighborhood as
Mhm.
well.
I would say we're really promoting both. There's a good
Yeah,
amount of adaptive reuse that happens.
okay.
Almost all of our developers start with rehab, start with
Yep,
adaptive reuse,
that's what I did.
because we also, yeah, almost everybody does. It's an
Yeah,
easier pathway in because we also, as an organization, really promote you taking a lot of small steps, reducing your risk, not trying to learn everything at once, right? Doing small projects and starting with rehabs is an incredible way to build your skills, build your experience, build your balance sheet, build, your knowledge set and your relationships in a community. And often people also are starting with buying something to rehab that they're going to then live in because the financing for an owner occupied project is much simpler. But anytime you can get some additional income units added into that rehab that you might live in, maybe you're buying an existing multiplex and rehabbing it. Maybe you're buying a house and cutting it into duplexes. Maybe you're buying a small house and adding an ADU. There's lots of different ways to kind of add another unit, which
yep.
then gives you a really good listing a property, doing leases, right? Being a landlord. And so even when done small, each one of these steps and kind of experiences builds an enormous amount of experience that then contributes positively to when you're doing the 4 unit or the 5 unit.
As far as being in my market, the Bay Area, and in Northern California, the biggest hurdle for us is like the building costs. Like we're up
Mhm.
around, I've seen as low as 350 square foot, but it's commonly 500, 550 square foot, right? And sometimes the math isn't working. And I look
Yeah.
at deal after deal after deal, and I'm like, the math is just like, it's just, I want to do this stuff. I want to build. I want to go out, and it's just like I can't make it work financially. What are you seeing in terms of helping to maybe address that? Some creative financing solutions that you're maybe seeing out there? Or how are you kind of thinking about these markets that are just much more expensive for labor and goods?
It's a probably 3-part answer. So sort of, part one is West Coast and New England are definitely our markets in the US that struggle the most with construction costs.
Mhm.
And those are also the markets with the most stringent building and development codes. And so one of the things that we're really seeing being pioneered is, a real move in the other direction, which is saying, if we're building perfect buildings, but we have this increasingly intense homelessness pressure because we don't have enough houses, we might be focusing on the wrong thing. And we're starting to see state level code changes that are starting to say missing middle buildings maybe should be built under IRC. Maybe California is a little bit different for this part. So, take this with a grain of salt, but we're starting to see a lot of southern states say we might not need fire sprinklers if the building is less than 10,000 square feet, maybe even up to a 6-unit building. We've had 2 states pass bills that missing middle housing can be built under the International Residential Code without fire sprinklers, which cuts construction costs sometimes 20 to 35%,
Yeah.
just right off the top. And it means too, often we're building what is a house size building that people live in under the code designed for houses.
Mhm.
So we're starting to see a real return to a push for more deregulation and reduction in building code and zoning code requirements, which has a direct dollar for dollar savings the minute that it gets passed. Zoning code changes are also really critical to lower land costs because land costs are often really astronomical also in those places that construction costs are really high. We're starting to see more modular, especially SIPs and panelized construction really assist with that. And then we're starting to see some really creative solutions. Larger houses being cut back up into smaller houses, hotels being converted into SROs, right? Existing building products being retasked in a really creative way that sometimes can kind of, thread the needle between all of these different codes and get to housing cheaper.
Yeah.
We're starting to see things like detached bedrooms. That's something that I first saw in Portland that now is really kind of making its way east. This idea that, zoning limits the number of kitchens with fixed cooking implements that you have, but it doesn't always limit the number of buildings that you can have, right? You can have a really big expensive house and build a pool house or build a potting shed or, build a she shed out in the back. And so that same idea, but maybe it's a bedroom that somebody rents, but they're sharing a bathroom and kitchen in the main house. Things like that can start to get to that place of people not living in their cars. Is the thing that we keep having to come back to, right? It's not like, would you rather have a nicer house? It's like, would you rather have a roof over your head? Is the thing that we have to keep reminding people, right? We're in a housing crisis that is as severe as we have seen it in our country. And it has real implications on people's lives right now. And so we can't pursue only changes that will be positively impactful 10 years from now.
Right. And the homeless crisis has an impact on all of our lives, right? Obviously, most acutely the people who don't have a house.
That's
but
correct.
It really does affect all of our quality of life, and it does require like collective thinking about it all.
Yeah.
So as a national organization, I mean, the amount of regulations you're potentially thinking about are just so extensive, and I mean, there's a lot to work on and think about. How are you able to enter different markets and think about different places in different ways? How do you see your organization have that kind of bandwidth to do that?
We say a lot that a lot of development is actually federally mandated. Building codes and finance rules and a lot of the things that control small developers work. And so a lot of the things that we're training are a nationally regulated thing. And so a lot of our trainings are really focused on how do real estate contracts work? How does a due diligence period work? How do you do due diligence and market research? How do financing products work? And which one might you use for which kind of product? How does a pro forma work? How does a building make money? All of those things are very, consistent across markets. And then we really work with our local host committees to tailor what are those really specific local elements. But we're a Big Ten organization. We're really trying to kind of create the conditions that allow small developers to succeed and thrive, and provide technical assistance on that 90% of development that is really consistent nationally, and contribute positively by sharing the lessons of we're seeing development in all of these different regions and all of these different ways. And so we can also really weigh in on, oh, this is a specific problem to this place versus, oh, that might feel specific to here, but that's actually a really general problem that everybody's struggling with. Here are the 10 things people have tried. And so we try to be that Big Ten organization that is, providing that back end technical support without claiming or wanting to be the local experts, right? We're trying to empower locals to be experts in their own communities.
Yeah, I love that. That's terrific. I could have used your support when I was doing my thing. The one thing also I think about is in terms of, you're talking about kind of building rentals in some ways. Are you also involved in building condos where people can buy units and start to build? Because that's one big thing too, is like I'm trying to help people build wealth, right, in real estate ownership, and renting is wonderful for people and it works, and I'm a landlord, but also thinking about like site condos, condo buildings, TICs, which are active here. Are you also involved in that kind of building housing for people to own as well as rent?
We do. We have quite a few developers who like to, try to build and hold products long term. But we also have lots of developers that are building for sale projects. We run through rental pro formas. We'll be in Alameda on March 7th.
Yes.
I think we've got our early bird pricing on our tickets is being kept low through Friday. Yep. So if you want to join us next week, all of that is available on our events calendar. It's incrementaldevelopment.org. I will be there as one of our faculty members, and we run through rental pro formas because they're more complicated. But for sale product and home ownership is a really important part of this. And a lot of our developers some projects make sense as for sale, some projects end up as for rent. Renting is a little bit more complicated in terms of the finance, the long-term, the property management. And so often we're teaching more towards a rental market and knowledge because it's more complicated. And if you understand rental, you can do for sale. But we definitely don't have a preference or kind of opinion on which one is right for what communities.
I really appreciate your time, and we'll be publicizing this event and try to get some folks down there. And we believe in your organization here. So
We're excited to see you. I'll be in Fresno the night before on March 6th, and then I'll be in Sacramento the day after on March 8th. So if anybody has conflicts with the March 7th event, also we'll be there for a couple of days. So all of that is on the events calendar, and I look forward to seeing you.
Thank you so much, Alli. Appreciate
Thanks.
it. All right. Bye.